Welcome back to Paper Things. This week we'll be reading chapters 36 through 39. Chapter 36, Permission Slips. Mr. Chandler! Mr. Chandler! Before Mr. Chandler reaches our table, his secretary comes up behind him and waylays him. "You'd better get outside," she says, panting slightly. "There's a reporter from the Port City Times talking with Keisha Cooper, and she's got a photographer with her, too." I crane my neck, trying to see out the row of windows behind me, but all I can see are trees and students milling around. "Why don't you go check it out?" Daniel says to me. "I'll watch the table." The morning bell rings, but word has spread about the reporter, and rather than heading to their classes, kids pour outside, eager to mug for the camera. I push my way through the throng until I can see Keisha, who's standing very straight and speaking to a reporter while she takes notes. "This is an act of civil disobedience," Keisha says. "As you know, Henry David Thoreau and Rosa Parks both acted on their ideals and helped raise awareness of the need for change. We're all wearing crazy hats today to bring back Eastland Elementary's traditions, to let Principal Chandler know that even though the traditions might not appear on academic tests, they're still important. They give us common experiences and help us feel like we're part of a community. Now listen here," a voice says, directly behind me. It's Mr. Chandler. He directs a few students to get out of his way, and suddenly he's standing next to me. The reporter quickly thanks Keisha and then turns to Mr. Chandler. "Mr. Chandler, what do you make of this student protest?" The photographer snaps a few photos of Mr. Chandler. I step back, hoping I'm not in the shots. As I've explained to students and faculty alike, these so-called traditions are frivolous and disrupt learning. Just take a look around. Valuable learning is being disrupted at this very moment. Students are not in class where they're supposed to be. Instead, they're making hats in the hallways and trying to get their picture in the newspaper. "Isn't it possible," says the reporter, "that important lessons are being learned by this protest?" "Protest is a rather grand word for this. Display," Mr. Chandler says. "But why don't you come and talk inside so that our students can get to their required classes?" Then he turns and directs all of us back to our classrooms. I slip away from the crowd and rush back to the table to tell Daniel what happened. I'm in the middle of my story when his eyes go big and he points behind me. I cringe and turn around slowly, expecting to see a glowering Mr. Chandler. Instead, I see the news reporter and photographer. "What's going on here?" the reporter asks. She looks nice, but all I can focus on is her pencil poised in the air, ready to take down my every awkward word. "This is a station for kids to make a crazy hat if they don't have one," Daniel says, leaning forward on the table. The reporter scribbles in her notebook and the photographer clicks away. "Has this table always been a part of the Hat Day tradition here at Eastland?" the reporter asks. "No," says Daniel. "Ari came up with the idea. She's actually the one who started this whole campaign. A few weeks ago, she organized a secret spring blizzard where we decorated the hallway with paper snowflakes just like we used to for the first snowfall. Right, Ari?" he says. The reporter swivels back toward me, but I'm still frozen. "Ari, tell them why you wanted to reestablish the traditions," Daniel urges. I think back to our spring blizzard and how Daniel had wanted me to tell Mr. Chandler why the Eastland traditions mattered so much. Not just to me personally, but to all of us. I threw up before I got the chance to explain things to him. But right here, right now, with the reporter looking at me, I realize that this may be my only chance to tell my story. And before I can change my mind, I start talking. I know what it's like to be an outsider, to feel like you don't belong. For 6 weeks, my brother and I were, well, homeless. We slept on couches and at the shelter and even in a car. We did the best we could, but my grades still suffered, and I even lost my best friend because of it. because I was too embarrassed to tell anyone what was really going on, because I didn't want to be different. One of the best things about the Eastland Elementary traditions is that they let everyone feel like part of the same community, just like Keisha said. And I wanted to make sure that everyone who wanted to be a part of Crazy Hat Day had that opportunity, whether their lives are whatever their lives are like, or whatever group they belong to. We're all Eastland Tigers, and this is our way of saying that. The reporter smiles and nods at the photographer, apparently signaling that our interview is over. She asks Daniel and me for our names. She even makes us spell them, and then they hurry off toward Mr. Chandler's office. I turn to Daniel, my cheeks suddenly burning. Did I really just tell that reporter that I was homeless for 6 weeks? Daniel smiles. You did. It was awesome. I wish I was half as brave as you are, Ariana Hazard. I laugh. I guess I am brave. Yeah, he says. But brave enough to jump from the bleachers? I spend the rest of the day waiting for Mr. Chandler's voice to come over the loudspeaker to call me and Daniel down to his office. I also keep expecting him to demand that students remove their hats, or the teachers to demand it, but no one does, even though the reporter is long gone. Then during social studies, the intercom hums to life, and Mr. Chandler's gruff voice crackles into Mr. O's classroom. Attention students. After discussing the matter with the members of the Port City School Board, I have decided to reinstate the Eastland Elementary traditions. Those of you wearing hats today may continue to do so. In addition, we will be holding the 5th grade library sleepover sometime in May. Permission slips will be going home with all eligible 5th graders at the beginning of next week. A roar of cheers and applause can be heard from all the classrooms in the 5th grade wing, and probably everywhere else in the school too. We did it! We really did it! Amid the excitement, though, something gives me pause. What exactly did Mr. Chandler mean when he said all eligible 5th graders? Chapter 37, Hearts. As I leave school, Sasha is standing outside the doors. Her time as patrol leader is up, and she is back to being one of the walkers. I can't help but hope that she's waiting for me. She is. As surprised as I am that she's waiting for me, I'm even more surprised that she's alone, with no Linny or Keisha in sight. Hey, I say, feeling oddly shy around my former best friend. Hey, she says, falling into step next to me. We walk together in silence for a ways. I feel like she wants to say something to me, but I can't for the life of me figure out what it could be. So, Fiona overheard you talking to that reporter this morning, Sasha says. My stomach drops. I didn't remember there being anyone else except Daniel in the hallway when I was being interviewed, but then again, I hadn't really been able to see anything but the camera. And? I ask finally, unable to stand the silence. And, Sasha says as we meander toward Head Start together, she says you told the reporter that you were homeless. My skin prickles with shame, but I hold my chin up and look Sasha in the eyes. I did, because I was. Sasha stops and stares at me, challenging me with her eyes. What happened? Did Jana lose her condo? And why didn't you tell me? Gage and I moved out of Jana's place for a while. They needed a break from each other, and I went with Gage, but it was harder being on our own than we'd realized it would be. Sasha put her hands on her hips. You still haven't said why you didn't tell me. Did you think I'd be mean about it? That I wouldn't understand? I'm not sure, I say, shrugging. Maybe. I think about reminding her of the time she and Linny and Keisha whisper talked about how greasy my hair looked or how I smelled, but I decide not to. But mostly I didn't want you to feel bad for me. Again. I'm so tired of being poor Airy. We continue walking without saying anything. You know, I get how you were feeling, Sasha says at last. I got sick and tired of being Airy's shadow. My shadow? You've always been the better student, the teacher's favorite. So when your grades started slipping and I got the leadership role but you didn't, I thought maybe it was my turn to be the one in the spotlight. And you thought I was ignoring you? That I was angry because you'd started to get some recognition? Something like that. I wouldn't do that, Sasha, I say. That's no way to treat a best friend. I wonder if Sasha is going to correct me to tell me that she's my former best friend. But instead she says, if we all get into Carter, do you think you could learn to be friends with Keisha too? I think about how cool Keisha was this morning, getting kids to wear their hats and speaking eloquently to the news reporter. Sure, I say, but I doubt that I'll get into Carter. I haven't even sent in my application yet. And I've just announced to a reporter that I was homeless for 6 weeks. Sasha screws up her face at that. They can't deny you a spot because you were homeless. That's like unconstitutional or something. And applications aren't due till tomorrow. There's still time. We part ways at the laundromat, just like always. As I watch Sasha head home, I realize that she's right. It's not too late. Not for Carter, and maybe not for us. At Head Start, I show the kids my crazy hat, and of course they want to make hats too. Since Fran and Carol weren't prepared to make hats today, Fran persuades the kids to make crowns instead. She helps them cut a jagged strip from construction paper that the kids can decorate with pom-poms and glitter. Then she staples the crowns to fit their heads. By the end of the afternoon, all the children have crowns, and their cheeks and noses are sparkling with glitter. I'm just about to leave for the day when Carol asks if perhaps I'd like to come to Head Start in the mornings during the summer. I hadn't thought of working past graduation, but it occurs to me that Jana might want to keep on working as a nurse, and coming to Head Start would give me something to do while she's at work. I tell her I'll check with Jana. Gage picks me up today, just like old times. Jana's working this evening. Gage and I are going to Flatbread for pizza. As soon as we've walked out the door, he tells me that he's going to have a room all his own at the Stability House that West told him about, and that the people who run it have already helped him set up a savings account. While listening to Gage's ideas for the future, I hear Fran call goodbye. I turn to wave, and I see her, not behind us, not walking to the bus stop as usual, but pedaling away on a bike. I can't wait to hear how that happened. That night, I work on the application for Carter Middle School. Fortunately, the blanks for address and name of guardian are now easy to fill in. For one of the questions, I write about my experience working with the kids at Head Start and about coming up with the idea for Reggie's paper wish planes. I don't know if these are the sorts of things that will impress the Carter people, but they're my truth. I stare at the last question, the one that basically asks you to describe what sets you apart from your peers, what makes you special, what makes you Carter material. I wonder if the people at Carter will read about me in the newspaper, talking about my experiences being homeless. That sure sets me apart. Maybe Sasha's right, and they can't legally discriminate against me for something like that, but I still can't really believe that a school like Carter would want to admit a student whose most noteworthy quality is that she didn't have a home for a month and a half. I push the application aside. Maybe in the morning I'll have the answer to that final essay question, but I sure don't have it now. Chapter 38, Scraps. I come downstairs to breakfast, and Jana, coffee cup in hand, is hunched over something at the breakfast bar. Her facial expression goes from smiling to a moment of sadness, and then back to pleasure again. "What are you reading?" I ask. She gets up from her seat, motioning for me to sit down to see for myself. It's the morning newspaper, and on the front page is a picture of me in my crazy hat, and the headline, "Homeless Girl Provides Means for Other Students to Uphold Valued Traditions." My stomach drops. I lean back in the chair, waiting for her to yell at me for airing my private business in front of the whole world, for being disloyal to her and to Gage. Instead, though, she clears her throat and reads the article aloud. "Ask anyone who attended Eastland Elementary School in the past 20 years, and they will happily tell you about the school's April 1st tradition, Crazy Hat Day. This year, however, Mr. Chandler, the newly appointed principal at the elementary school, abolished the practice, along with many of the school's other traditions, citing a need to focus on academic standards instead. Today, in a protest led by Keisha Cooper, students wore crazy hats to express the importance of these traditions and the role they play in building a learning community. This isn't the first time students have indicated their dissatisfaction with the changes at Eastland. Earlier this month, Ariana Hazard, who is credited with having had the original idea of a civic protest, and Daniel Huber hung snowflakes throughout the halls to bring attention to the issue. At the onset of Crazy Hat Day, Miss Hazard was found at a crafts table she set up to provide materials for students to make their own hats if needed. Many weeks of homelessness have made Ariana Hazard particularly sensitive to students who might be in need of extra support. One of the best things about the Eastland Elementary traditions is that they let everyone feel like part of the same community, just like Keisha said," explained Miss Hazard. "And I wanted to make sure that everyone who wanted to be a part of Crazy Hat Day had that opportunity, whatever their lives are like or whatever group they belong to. We're all Eastland Tigers, and this is our way of saying that." Thanks to the efforts of students like Ariana Hazard, Daniel Huber, and Keisha Cooper, the voices of the students were heard. By the end of the day, the Port City School Board agreed to reinstate these long-standing traditions. Jana puts the paper down. "I'm so sorry," I say in a rush. "I know I shouldn't have said anything, and maybe now you'll get in trouble, or Gage will, and I've blown my chance to get into Carter, which is all that Mama ever wanted for me, but—" "Hush, Ari," Jana interrupts. Then she leaves the room. I stand in the kitchen fighting back tears. What have I done? Just then, Jana returns carrying a scrapbook, one with my name on it. She takes the scissors from the utility drawer, picks up the newspaper, and cuts out the article. She opens the scrapbook. As she flips through the pages, I catch glimpses of pictures. Pictures of me and of Gage, and of me and Gage. Pictures of Mama and of the three of us together. Pictures that I thought were lost for good. All this time, Jana had kept them safe in a scrapbook. About halfway through the scrapbook, the pictures stop being familiar, and I realize that somehow, without ever realizing it, Jana had been taking pictures of me and Gage, documenting our time here with her. There are pictures of us leaving for school, pictures of us cleaning up after dinner, pictures of us laughing together in the living room. Just everyday moments caught on camera and saved in a book. Jana stops at a blank page near the back, takes a glue stick from her pocket, applies glue to the back of the article, and carefully pastes it into the book. Above it, with a black Sharpie, she writes, "Proud moment." I know that you and Gage hold your mother's wishes for you close to your hearts, and I support that, Jana says slowly. But you've got to understand that you should never want any of her wishes to cause suffering. Your mother wanted you and Gage to love and support each other always, no matter where each of you is living. And that's what you'll do. And your mother wanted you to go to Carter because she wanted you to shine, but Ariana Hazard, you can shine wherever you are. That doesn't come from the school. That comes from you. She points to the picture of me in my crazy hat. See? Look at you, girl. Tears fill my eyes and I blink them away. I stare at those words emblazoned above the article. Proud moment. Jana isn't ashamed of me or of Gage. She's proud of us. She's always been proud of us. And she knew my mama better than anyone. Could you take me to Office Mart later? I asked suddenly. What for? I'd like to make a copy of the article for my Carter application. In the end, the people at Carter might not choose me, but at least they will have gotten to know me. The me that my experiences have helped me to become. Chapter 39, Report Cards. Coming back to school on Monday isn't easy. Jana had reacted well to my public announcement that I'd been homeless, but I have no idea how kids at school will act. Fortunately, Sasha and Keisha are right there, waiting for me at my locker. Did you see the front page of the paper, Ari? Keisha asks. Wasn't that cool? I'm relieved to hear Keisha's enthusiasm, and I know that she didn't mind sharing the spotlight. But I also can't help noticing that Sasha's quiet words of agreement are just that. Quiet. I hope she isn't feeling as if she's being pushed into the shadows again. Throughout the day, kids approach me to ask questions or make comments about my homelessness. Some are awkward. Did you have to ask people for money? Or was it scary being on the streets? Some are very personal. Why would you leave the home you had? At first, these questions make me nervous, and I'm afraid to answer. Afraid that my answers will lead to teasing. But as the day wears on and I have more conversations, I realize that kids are just being curious, that everyone wonders whether something like homelessness could ever happen to them. And I try to answer as honestly as I can without getting defensive. During final announcements, Mr. Chandler tells us that the 5th grade sleepover will be on May 11th, 2 weeks before graduation and 1 week before applicants hear whether they've been accepted to Carter. Eligible 5th graders will have completed all their assignments, paid any library fines they may have, and have consistently exhibited good Eastland citizenship throughout the school year. Good citizenship? As I ponder this last requirement, I notice that Mr. O is looking right at me. Will you have a presentation tomorrow as promised, Ms. Hazard? The kids laugh. At the end of the day, my last name is still the funniest thing about me. Right after dinner, I ask Jana if she'll listen as I practice my presentation. I know she'll find areas for improvement. As I click on my slide presentation on her computer, I can tell that she's especially pleased with my subject and touched that I chose someone who she introduced to me. Did you know that Louisa May Alcott was a nurse like you? I ask her. She nods. During the Civil War, she says, and just like me, she raised a little girl whose mother had died. I smile at these connections between Jana and Louisa May Alcott. But as I'm clicking through slides about Louisa's Little Women, I recognize another connection that I hadn't made until now. Every reader of Little Women thinks that the main character, Jo, will marry her best friend Laurie. But she doesn't. Laurie marries Jo's sister, Amy, instead. I turn to Jana with my mouth wide open. What? She asks, and suddenly I'm scrambling for a careful response. What? She repeats. I give up and blurt, why did my father marry Mama instead of you? She gives me a look of total surprise, and I'm afraid that she's going to ask me how I know about her relationship with my father, that I'm going to have to confess to snooping, but she doesn't. Maybe she assumes that Gage told me, or maybe she's more concerned with my question than how I arrived at it. She shakes her head as if trying to clear out what's not important. Relationships can be very complicated, she says. I think I was trying too hard to shape your father into the man I wanted him to be. I had a specific course for the two of us, and I was forever outlining my plans. Your mother was different. She was more playful, more spontaneous, and more accepting. I think your father liked who he was when he was around her. Was it terrible when he chose my mother instead of you? Jana's silent for a moment, and then she nods. They broke my heart. And I'll tell you now, I was not forgiving. In fact, I was rather hateful. I never thought your mother would get back in touch with me. I've always wondered why Mama chose Jana to raise us instead of someone who knew us better, like Mariana, and now I feel even more confused. Jana must have been thinking along the same lines. I guess your mother figured that since I had loved your father at one time and had cared deeply for her, I'd have no trouble loving you and Gage as well. And she was right, of course. Though I know now that I took out some of my old hurt on you guys, especially Gage. It's in this moment that I realize that Jana is the only person I know who really knew, both my parents. Suddenly I have a million questions. Did my father like to read? What kind of music did he listen to? Was he shy? Maybe when my application to Carter is completed and my social studies presentation is finished, I'll ask Jana these questions. And maybe, just maybe, I'll start to get a sense of the dad I never knew. That's all of Paper Things for this time. We will finish the book next week.